on its upcoming seed exhibition to be held at Abuko from the 10th to the 14th of this month. And on the international scene, the conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region could spiral into a civil war. That is the warning from the UN Security Council, which has met as rebels threaten to march onto the capital, Addis Ababa. Government forces have been battling them for a year, but the UN is calling for an end to the fighting and urge dialogue. Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna reports from UN headquarters in New York, the US.
The message to the Security Council is clear. Time is short. The window to secure a mediated settlement to the conflict is closing.
In a country of over 110 million people, over 90 different ethnic groups, and 80 languages, no one can predict what continued fighting and insecurity will bring. But let me be clear. What is certain is that the risk of Ethiopia descending into a widening civil war is only too real.
The Council was addressed remotely by the African representative leading mediation efforts.
All these leaders here in Addis Ababa and in the north agree individually that the difference between them are political and require political solution through dialogue. This, therefore, constitutes a window of opportunity.
But the High Representative warned that this window of opportunity is small. The Ethiopian ambassador made his country's position clear.
We remind everyone concerned there are no two parties here. There is a government representing the whole of the Ethiopian people and representing the Ethiopian state, and there is a group advancing its criminal cause through atrocities.
It's a stance that has the support of some members of the Council, especially Russia, which has privately insisted that an elected government should not be asked to negotiate with forces attempting to unseat it. The Security Council President has insisted there's no division on the issue, and it does appear that all agree on 2 points: that there's a vital need for humanitarian assistance and that it's the African Union that should take the lead in mediation efforts. The majority view perhaps reflected in the statement to the Council by the UK, which said addressing the humanitarian and human impact of the conflict should be the immediate focus. It continued, it's past time for all parties to put the Ethiopian people first. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, United Nations.
The United States and European Union are leading calls to reject the outcome of the Nicaragua's election, along with neighboring Costa Rica, after President Daniel Ortega won about 76% of Sunday's vote, securing a fourth term. Most opposition figures have been arrested or barred from running in the last few months, while international observers and journalists have been kept at bay. Al Jazeera's Lucy Newman reports from San Jose in neighboring Costa Rica.
The only issue is not whether Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega won Sunday's controversial election, but rather whether he seized it. Ortega had imprisoned scores of critics, including 7 of the most competitive would-be candidates, and barred independent observers and journalists from entering the country. International condemnation was swift and harsh.
This was not a free election. This should not surprise us, because this was a chronicle of fraud foretold.
Countries from Chile to neighboring Costa Rica to the United States and the European Union denounced the election as illegitimate, anti-democratic, and a pantomime, saying they would not recognize the results. But Venezuela, Cuba, and Russia have rushed to Ortega's defense.
When the voting was over yesterday evening, the White House announced its refusal to recognize it and called on other countries to do the same. We consider it unacceptable and firmly condemn such a policy.
The Biden administration and the EU is already considering going beyond current individual sanctions against Vice President Rosario Murillo, who was Ortega's wife, or the chief of police, who was accused of gross human rights violations. In neighboring Costa Rica, television journalist Lucia Pineda, who was accused of terrorism and released from prison following a brief amnesty, continues to broadcast from exile. her news channel was raided and expropriated, along with other independent media. She says restoring democracy in Nicaragua will be difficult.
Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to rot in jail in Nicaragua. The Ortegas have gone out of their way to spread fear and spy on people going house to house. But I have faith in God. I'm waiting for a miracle, the miracle of freedom.
But while they wait for that miracle, opponents of Daniel Ortega and his wife acknowledge that what they also need is to put aside their differences and join forces, something that has eluded them for years. Amnesty International is predicting that there will be a new wave of repression against critics of the government following this election, which should only fan the number of people who are fleeing from the country and looking for refuge elsewhere, like here in Costa Rica. Record numbers of Nicaraguans are already joining other Central Americans in their quest to reach the United States, adding more pressure to an already unprecedented migration crisis in the region. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, San Jose, Costa Rica.
6 Palestinian rights groups recently designated as terrorist organizations by Israel say at least 3 of their activists had their phones hacked. They claim the spyware tool PEGASUS was used on their phone for more than a year. PEGASUS is supposed to be blocked from use on Israel or Palestinian phones. Al Jazeera's Harry Fawcett reports from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
After weeks spent rejecting Israeli accusations of links to a designated terror organization, 6 Palestinian rights groups went public with accusations of their own. An investigation found that 6 iPhones, at least 3 of them belonging to staff from the Palestinian NGOs, had been infected with PEGASUS spyware.
It's a strong feeling to have your privacy violated, even the simplest of things. My wife couldn't sleep for 3 days after finding out, being extremely worried. Our privacy was violated as a family, the children, their pictures, our conversations with family and friends.
PEGASUS is sold to governments around the world by the Israeli company NSO, under license from Israel's Ministry of Defense. In recent years, there have been many reports of the spyware being used by authoritarian regimes to target journalists, activists, and politicians. Last week, the US blacklisted the company. PEGASUS is supposed to be blocked from use on Israeli or Palestinian phones. On Monday, NSO said, "We cannot confirm or deny the identity of our government customers. As we stated in the past, NSO Group does not operate the products itself. The company licenses approved government agencies to do so." Last month, 3 days after the investigation into suspected phone hacking began, Israel designated all 6 organizations as terror groups, accusing them, among other things, of funneling money to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. There was significant pushback from international donors, but this Sunday the Israeli army endorsed the move, giving itself the powers to shut down offices, confiscate money and make arrests. The groups are demanding international protection and an investigation into who's behind the spyware attack.
This technology was used in these cell phones, but we don't know who was implementing it and what for. And this is why we are calling for more investigation in the case, and in order to find who's responsible and to try to find him accountable for this violation.
The story has emerged on the same day as the Washington Post published results of an investigation into an Israeli facial recognition system known as Blue Wolf. It's said to use a huge database of smartphone images of Palestinians taken by Israeli soldiers to target people for detention. We've sought comment from Israel on the alleged use of the PEGASUS spyware on Israeli and Palestinian phones, but so far the only response has been from the military, which has denied using PEGASUS. As for the Palestinian groups, they say they will continue to operate as normal despite the heightened risk. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
That's all for this edition of the 1 p.m. News Roundup. More news update coming at 8 p.m. Stay tuned. Bye from us.